The MeToo movement started out as a way for victims to speak more freely about their experiences and hold people accountable. But some say it's drifted from its roots. So the question is, are people misusing it? I'm here with Inez Stepman. She's a senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, and Francis Maxwell, he's the host of The Breakdown on Facebook. So here's how this is going to work, guys. We're going to have you both start with opening arguments to camera. You'll have 30 seconds for that, and then we'll get into this discussion. Sound good?
Sounds perfect.
All right. So, Inez, we're going to start with you. Now, you feel like people are misusing the Me Too movement.
Yeah, so I think we could all cheer when serial predators like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby were brought to justice. Men, women, conservatives, liberals, I think we could all cheer about that. But my three questions are, by what standard of evidence are we doing this, if we're going to be bringing people to justice? And two, what counts as assault? And three, is this going to become a political weapon rather than about victims?
All right, Francis, you're up.
Yeah, I think the argument in favor of Me Too is very simple. Sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes in the United States. Around 2 out of 3 sexual assaults will not be reported. Meanwhile, 1 out of every 6 women are targeted by sexual assault and often face rape or attempted rape. This is an issue that society has to address head on, and the only way we address that is by making women feel, majority of women and men also, feel more comfortable speaking out, and that they will not be vilified and victimized immediately by those in the mainstream media, which has often happened. So in order to embolden them to come forward, we have to show support. Doesn't mean that we just immediately assume guilt, but it means that a conversation has to be had, and I'm all for something that brings that to light.
All right, guys, so obviously this conversation feels very fresh after the Kavanaugh confirmation. And when this movement first started a little over a year ago, it seemed like people were more willing to believe accusers of someone like Harvey Weinstein. Why do you feel like the conversation has changed now? It doesn't feel like that way anymore. Francis?
Well, I feel like I would have to disagree in terms of, yeah, Harvey Weinstein himself is an example where more people with corroborating evidence agreed that this is a man who has to be held accountable. But you go back to Anita Hill and you start to see that historically women are often not believed and their stories are not taken into account, and they're victimized, and they feel that their stories cannot be heard.
I think we're talking about very ambiguous situations a lot of the time, and you can see the movement over time from things like what Harvey Weinstein was accused to the Aziz Ansari story a few months ago in Babe.net, right, where it was essentially bad sex. And I think as a culture, as a community, we've lost the language to talk about when sexual experiences might be negative without talking about consent. I don't think consent is the right framework, and I think it's bringing in a criminal framework into what should be a cultural conversation about the fallout of our sexual culture in this country.
Francis, do you want to respond to that really briefly?
I think that it's an important point that you brought up whilst immediately assuming that the woman who came forward in the Aziz Ansari story was simply due to bad sex. I think that goes to show how much more work is needed, that you just assumed that right there, because that's
the story.
Okay, that's read the story, but it's two different perspectives. I think that the Aziz Ansari story is actually a very important one. It sparked a conversation about cloudiness around consent and cloudiness around two experiences. We need to move forward as a society to start understand that those aren't always cut and dry.
I think there's actually some interesting common ground here between social conservatives and the new left, which is, I think we all agree that the current sexual culture is broken. The difference is, as a conservative, we look back and we have the constrained view of human nature, right? Thomas Sowell, conflict of visions. We see male nature and female nature as fixed and different. I think there are fundamental differences between women and men, and those psychological differences definitely play out in the way they interact with each other, either romantically or sexually. The very real pain that's out there right now in this kind of casual sex sort of hookup culture that sometimes produces very unpleasant experiences, and more often for women than men, is that we're not going back to the root and saying, okay, how are women and men different? How can we better understand each other? Instead, it seems to be demonizing men and demonizing male sexuality, and I just can't get behind that.
All right. Do you think both sides, Inez, are guilty of weaponizing Me Too, this movement?
Well, with regard to Kavanaugh, I think it was definitely the Democrats on the committee, and that's shown in how they dealt with Dr. Ford's testimony. I think it's the left that's weaponizing Me Too, that's politically weaponizing this, and we can see that by the way the Democrats handled this hearing and actually handled the allegations brought forward by Dr. Ford, right? Because Dianne Feinstein sat on this for months. And then this was leaked to the press. This was done in the court of public opinion when it could have been done behind closed doors. That full investigation could have taken place. And in fact, most Americans agree with me. 75% of Americans, that means a lot more than just Republicans and conservatives, think that this was handled badly. And I think it sets a bad precedent going forward with handling these kinds of accusations when you throw them immediately into a super politicized environment. I don't think that's good for victims coming forward. I don't think that's good for innocent men.
But there's questions that they were not asking. The committee was not asking Brett Kavanaugh, pushing him on questions. They were simply allowing him to shout over, which, if you were to say, let's go and have this in a quiet back room, how do you think Brett Kavanaugh would act in a quiet back room compared to how he's acting in front of the world? He was given all the privileges of a white, privileged man in that position of power to scream over senators, telling Feinstein, hold on, I don't mean to interrupt. If Blasey Ford acted like that, her testimony has already been tarnished and torn and thrown apart. Imagine she acted like that.
All right, guys, we could go on all day about Kavanaugh. He is on the Supreme Court now, so we're gonna move on from that just for this moment. But what I am gonna ask you to do is change things up for us here, all right? So this is the part of our show that we like to call Switching Sides, where we push two very smart people out of their comfort zones to confront their own biases. Now, if you had to argue for the other side, what would be the strongest way to do that? Francis, I'll start with you.
I think I'll just double down on what I said. A presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And I think that Inez made a great point, as that doesn't mean by the standard of court of law, but it means going into a situation and understanding that there is two sides to it. Innocence until proven guilty is something I can get behind as long as it applies to all Americans.
All right, I think I just got you to switch sides there with a little asterisk on it. So, yeah, we're going to go with you, Inez. How would you argue for the other side? How would you do that?
Look, I think the other side's strongest argument is that there's an enormous amount of pain here. I think Jessica Valenti really tapped into something when she said the Aziz Ansari story. That sounds normal to a lot of women. It sounds like something that happens in their own lives and their friends' lives. And I think there is something broken there. I just don't agree with the left on the solutions going forward.
These conversations are not easy to have. I mean, that goes without saying. So I thank you guys for coming here and attempting our mental exercise of switching sides. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.